Hello, everyone. This is Marie Sullivan. It's 4 p.m. on Tuesday, July 14, known in some circles as Bastille Day. Hoping that you're all staying cool. As I said a few minutes ago, 109 is a comfortable temperature compared to 116 in some circles. With that, I hope you're all staying comfortable and cool and enjoying air conditioning. But before I call us to order, state that I will be making a switch on the agenda. I'll announce that in a moment. And also, I don't know if Ms. Munoz is on, and so I'm going to call her roll. She's our new student advisory board.
I'm here.
And great. I see your name on the list, so I'm roll. Wanted to give you a special shout out. Welcome to your meeting with us. So with that, I'm going to call roll, and we'll move on from there. I'm going to call roll of board members. So Ms. Munoz, you're present. Mr. Hendricks.
Present.
Good to hear your voice. Ms. McGrath. Ms. McGrath, I see that you're trying maybe to say hello.
Present.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to know you're there. Dr. Narini.
I'm here.
Mr. Barr. No, in a training and racing to join us. Do you know him as on, Elsa?
No, I do not.
Okay, he will join us in a minute then. Dr. Thor has also been delayed. She'll be joining us shortly. Ms. Wynn is not able to attend today, present. So we have present and our student advisory board member. There will not be action taken today, but I did want for the record. The other piece of information is we will start our agenda with the update with the return to work plan and then move to a discussion on athletics for the academic year 2021. With that, I also want to acknowledge that we recognize there have been several listening sessions on the subject of athletics. I'm hearing from Mr. Saar that he's on, but we can't hear him. So I don't know why that is.
Mr. Saar, you're showing as an attendee versus a participant.
How can we get him switched over?
The tech crew is working on it right now. They're reaching out to him.
Okay. Would someone let me know when he's on then, please?
Yes.
As a panelist.
Yes.
Thank you. And going back to my other comment, so there's been a tremendous thing in talking around the issue of athletics, and that's what compelled us to have today's work session. It is closely tied to the issues around the return to campus. There have been other elements that are being considered. I know we have a presentation today on both the athletics and the return to campus update. Again, I want to repeat, there's no action posted for today. Technically, this answer does lie with the chancellor, or decision, excuse me, and we will see where that goes. I expect, Dr. Gonzalez, that you will be prepared to make a decision pretty quickly after given today's activity and also the updates from the NJCAA, et cetera. So with that, I want to remind everyone that we do have mute, and for those that want to speak, I recognize that it takes a few seconds to unmute and make your comments. So with that, I'm going to turn this meeting over to Dr. Gonzalez with the update return to work plan. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sullivan, members of the board, CEC, and guests that are with us virtually on this call. We thank you for the opportunity to come together to discuss, as you mentioned, an update on where we are in terms of returning to campus for employees and for students as we approach the fall semester. And as we approach the dates that we initially shared with you in a meeting several weeks ago, where we were hopeful and wishful on some dates looking into the future when it came back to the possibility of returning to work and returning students to campus. And so you'll have that presentation. And then, as you also mentioned, given the amount of discussion going on around athletics, there was a request by the board to have an opportunity to learn more about athletics and the impact of COVID-19 on athletics. And we're looking forward to our conversation in that regard. We're going to start, as you mentioned, we appreciate you making the adjustment because we think that the first presentation will help inform the second, especially as it relates to the type of data that we are using to inform our decisions and to inform decisions moving forward. You're going to hear in the return to work presentation from Dr. Greg Peterson, president of Chandler Gilbert Community College. And when we jump into the athletics presentation portion, you're going to hear from Dr. Dale, president of Paradise Valley Community College, and Christina Hundley, who serves as the president of District Athletic Council. We have a number of folks who are also available and on standby to answer any questions or to weigh in at appropriate times. And so I encourage them to take advantage of the opportunity that they're available to us. And with that said, we'll jump right into the presentation, and I will turn it over to Dr. Peterson.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez.
Dr. Peterson. Am I the only one that's not hearing him? Hold on, I'm getting a text from him, President Sullivan.
Yeah, I don't see him listed as the
Okay.
panelist.
Elza, could you please unmute him? Elza, he has sent me a text indicating that the host has muted him and he can't unmute himself.
Dr. Gonzalez, do you
Yep.
want to start us off while they're trying to move him to the, my guess is he's not listed as a panelist, so he might be in the same scenario as Mr. Sarr was moments ago.
Perhaps. I'm afraid that others may have that same issue. I hope that that's not the case.
Now I see Mr. Sarr has been transferred over. I still don't see Mr. Peterson listed.
Okay. If you don't mind, let me just check to see if Dr. Dale and Christina are available. I want to make sure that we're going to be able to hear them and get that situated.
Chancellor, this is Paul. I'm available.
Very good. Thank you.
Chancellor, this is Christina Hundley. I'm available as well.
Thank you.
Chancellor, this is Greg. I so apologize. I am back in.
Thank you very much. Please take it from there. Thank you for your patience, President Sullivan, members of the board.
No problem. Thank you. Go ahead.
President Sullivan, members of the board, Dr. Gonzalez, members of CEC, and our virtual guests. I have the privilege to quickly walk you through hopefully some thorough overview of our approach to return to campus. There's a lot of information. I won't be going over all of it, but much of it's been provided as a resource for the board in some of the greater detail of the types of resources and decisions that that are helping guide our work. If you want to go to the next slide. So we wish we had a book that looked a lot like this that could support, tell us how we should be navigating a pandemic with a special Arizona edition. As this doesn't exist, we are learning as we move through this situation. Next slide. Early on, the Chancellor's Executive Council, CEC, adopted guiding principles to help us in our decision-making moving forward. Our number one principle, of course, is prioritizing health, safety, and well-being of our students, faculty, and staff. And then second, maintaining that continuity of instruction and quality of our instruction operations during this time. What I'm going to briefly review today is the data behind our deliberations, talk a little bit about phase one, which is occurring right now on our campuses, what we're learning, where we were at in May as we were talking about projecting for the fall, what's changed based on our current conditions, where we are, and what we're recommending for changes. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Dr. Dale, Ms. Hunley, to talk about intercollegiate athletics in more detail. So as we talk about data, what we're learning, again, this is new terrain for us. It's new terrain for the nation, and so there's a lot of complexity in the data and trying to understand what key indicators we should be tracking as we make decisions. They're not as clear cut as we would hope. And so what you'll see on the next two slides are a list of indicators that are helping us work through positive trends or negative trends in determining our ability to safely return to our campuses and provide in-person services and instruction. So this first slide here, you'll see are focused on where we're seeing spread or growth of cases of the virus. On the next slide, you will see examples of decreases, so looking at downward trajectory. So helping us to look across multiple variables in determining what conditions look like and what they may look like in the future. The data that we're drawing from, if you look at the next slide, shows you we're pulling from really with the Center for Disease Control, CDC, as our main initiating point, looking at multiple national and local data sources. So the Harvard Global Health Institute has a lot of information, Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington, as well as our local Department of Health Services here in Arizona, and ASU's recent work with their Biodesign Institute. Before we look at the next slides, which we really won't go into detail, that they just demonstrate examples of the type of detail that are of data that are available for us to review. I wanted to talk a little bit about the four main indicators that nationally are being reviewed and that we're considering in our indicators and our metrics. They really are the number of confirmed cases, the positive test rates, the hospitalizations related to COVID-19, and then daily deaths. The first two, so there's a really good article by the Wall Street Journal this weekend that talked about the advantages and disadvantages of all four indicators. The first two, the main advantage is that they are leading or early indicators, which help us in being more proactive in decision making. One of the biggest challenges with confirmed cases and positive test rate is that they don't always necessarily directly align with the severity of the outbreak. So there can be incidences that are of mild or asymptomatic that aren't reflected in those indicators. The advantages of the second two indicators, the hospitalization and daily deaths, they very much align with the severity and give a clear picture of the direct impact of the pandemic. Their challenges are, of course, as lagging indicators, they're a little bit more difficult to be proactive in making decisions. And there is some variance in reporting for those specific indicators within states. And so that's why we were really looking at why you're seeing a breadth of data as we look at multiple indicators, so we can have as comprehensive a view of what's happening in the space. I'm going to ask if we'll just scroll through the next slides. Again, they're really there for reference, so you get a sense of what's on the Harvard Global Health Institute. Go ahead and continue the data we're pulling. Again, more Harvard Global Health. Go ahead and continue. This is directly from the CDC. If we continue this slide here, Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. One thing I just want to note here on this slide is it's an example of where we're seeing a lot of fluctuation between now and November. And data, some of the data, for example, the daily deaths is showing that even with that fluctuation, there's not anticipating significant difference in some of our numbers between now and that time. Go ahead and continue. This is information for Institute of Health Metrics. You can continue the next slide. This is our local data drawn from Arizona's Department of Health Services. This is updated daily. There is some in this data, you'll notice, as Governor Ducey announced this last week, there has been some leveling, not the significant drop that we're hoping for back to what happened in your C in March through May, but a decrease from the end of June. Go ahead and continue the next slide. This is from ASU's biodesign, again, looking at Maricopa County versus the state and the trajectory of cases relative to deaths. Go ahead and continue. So this slide then, if we look at all of this data, some of the key findings that are emerging are the continued increase in the number of confirmed cases, specifically in Maricopa County, where we're seeing significant growth across the nation as well as in Maricopa County is in that younger band of age, so 20 to 24 age group, comparable to many of our students. There are estimations of a significant number of individuals who are asymptomatic. And then the governor this last week did step back some of our reopening specifically for bars, gyms, movie theaters, some of those spaces that would promote inside gathering of larger groups. You want to go ahead and move to the next slide? So based upon these data, currently what we're seeing is with our indicators, we're seeing continued large-scale transmission across these different metrics. And then if you move to the next slide, we are not yet seeing the downward trajectories that we would hope to see as we're looking at returning to campus and being able to provide the normalcy around a sense of safety for faculty, staff, and students. So this kind of gives you a sense of the data, how we're trying to gauge it objectively, where we're looking at it, how we're pulling it together. If you want to go ahead and move to the next slide. So if you remember, we did have a number of courses in the spring semester, primarily career technical education or CTE courses that had an in-person component which could not be fulfilled in an online or remote setting. And so in order to be able to support our students, many of whom were close to completing their program, we did make an agreement to bring back in a phase one, a limited number of courses onto our campuses. That phase began June 15th over over an 8-week period. Many of those courses will not take all 8 weeks to complete, but that was the time frame that was allotted. Go ahead and go to the next slide. You'll see the size of this this phase is very small. So this reflects not only those faculty and staff participating in phase 1, but also our essential or necessary services, staff in public safety, facilities, IT, those who have been on our campus from March throughout the pandemic. So you'll see very small numbers in comparison to what we normally provide on our campuses. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We've learned a few things in what's been in some sense of a pilot of what's it like to bring courses back onto campus. The first thing is that we've put a lot of effort into establishing standard safety guidelines and thinking through protocols. And so we have been able to maintain health and safety standards within these very controlled settings with a high level of coordination. So I really cannot speak highly enough of our faculty and staff in their preparation and thinking through how do we create environments that do our best to mitigate spread and protect our students. We found in general students are willing to adhere to our safety guidelines, though there is some safety fatigue. And that's understandable. I think very few of us are conditioned to wear a face covering or a mask for a significant amount of time. And so that we're finding that it's difficult for students when they're in these longer classes to keep their face coverings on. So there have been some challenges there. What we've also learned that even with these positive efforts, it's not an if, it's a when there will be a confirmed COVID-19 case on our campuses. So even within this last month, we've had multiple confirmed cases for students, faculty, and staff on our campuses, and they've had different impact. I can give one specific example. At Chandler Gilbert, we had a student who was in one of our cohort programs, attended the first few days of class, the first week of class for phase 1. Over the weekend was confirmed as having contracted COVID-19, which led us to quarantine the entire class of 25 students and faculty for 2 weeks. So even with all of the efforts that we're taking, we do recognize that our ability to fully mitigate the exposure and risk of the spread of the virus is limited. In addition, we're learning it takes additional resources to manage student-reported cases of exposure. A lot of working with students to be able to reach out, gather information, do tracking of who they were interacting with within the 14-day time frame, working to make sure that we're monitoring their health, looking at quarantining, and then of course the follow-up with the sanitation pieces. So we're finding that there are a lot of extra details that we're working through as we respond to these issues. If we want to go ahead and move to the next slide. So that gives you a sense of what we're learning. As we began these conversations in May, thinking about the fall, we started planning. As Dr. Gonzalez mentioned, we had initially anticipated optimistically that these plans would begin to be implemented in the summer. And so I'd like to just talk briefly over where we thought we were and then a little bit about where we are now. So you move to the next slide, please. If you remember the middle of May, Governor Ducey announced that we were seeing significant improvements in our 4 indicators, and so we were going to return stronger. This led us to optimistically believe that we could look at a return to campuses beginning sometime in the summer, in July specifically. I'll go ahead, next slide. In preparation, as I mentioned, the district adopted some standard safety guidelines across all the colleges, as well as the colleges went back and modified the fall 2020 schedule to ensure compliance with those safety guidelines. That impacted the number of students who could be in a classroom. It impacted the number of courses that could be offered on campus. And I've got a slide later that shows this movement of more of many of our in-person classes being scheduled in an online modality instead. The district office and the colleges also work together to procure significant stock of sanitation supplies and personal protection equipment, PPE, as well as doing full assessments of buildings. So looking at building flow, access to different facilities, looking at HVAC airflow, at plexiglass implementation. So many of those different pieces to think about how these safety guidelines would be implemented. Go ahead, next slide, please. This is just for the board as a resource, a little bit more detail on the components of our safety standards, which include social distancing, promoting personal hygiene. You'll see on the next slide, face coverings, and cleanliness and disinfecting. So those are the main components of our safety standards and some of the detail behind that. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. As the Chancellor mentioned, we really, I think mirroring the work of the nation, mirroring the state, we really approached this with a phased adoption of thinking about how we would return faculty and staff to on-campus work. The phase one, as I mentioned, was that ultra limited teach out of spring 2020 courses. Phase two, which we had anticipated would begin in July, was a smaller number of staff with job functions that were necessary to complete on campus. We anticipated that we would slightly increase that in a phase three, and then a phase four would be the majority of faculty and staff returning to the workplace when we had a greater sense of normalcy in our conditions. Go ahead to the next slide, please. As you can see, as we did this preparation, this data continues to change as we're seeing even more movement from in-person courses into our online setting. But I think it's very telling if you compare the fall of 2020 to just last year, 2019. We had about 2/3 of classes in 2019 were in person or had an in-person component. We are now more than 2/3 of our courses fully online for the fall semester. So go ahead and continue the next slide. So what's changing for the fall? Go ahead to the next slide. So again, we just really wanted to clarify the reasoning for why we would bring courses back onto campus. Again, specifically looking at those programs that needed to be offered with an in-person component. And then because as community colleges, we serve the breadth of students in our community, we do have students who are vulnerable and cannot be successful in a fully online setting. So really thinking about how do we support those students. Next slide. So there are 4 areas that we've considered. You'll notice there we've had public safety facilities, IT, consistently on campus. You'll see these areas as we consider. Go ahead and go to the next slide, and we'll talk through those areas. So for the fall course schedule, you'll notice again we are moving to restrict the number of courses and programs that can be offered in person. So you will see more movement of courses into an online modality, either live online or regular online. And we're looking at being able to honor voluntary selection in those classes where possible by faculty. As we look at the next slide, you notice our recommendation is to bring very limited staff and faculty on to support student enrollment, support services, academic support services, and learning spaces. Again, the very minimal that we need to be able to support our most vulnerable students. That this group could start as early as August 3rd. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This would mean that the remainder of our faculty and staff, we would look at postponing their return to campus to an October 5th at earliest, and then giving colleges the flexibility to stagger sequence after that date. So not all faculty and staff would return necessarily on October 5th. Go ahead and go to next slide. Hopefully that provides some thorough background on the types of data that we're using, the broader context for decisions we're making in regards to bringing people on campus, and how we're approaching those decisions. And so with that, I'd like to turn the conversation over to my colleagues, Dr. Dale and Ms. Hunley, to talk about specifically intercollegiate athletics.
Excuse me, Dr. Gonzalez, if I may, I'd like to ask board members if they have any questions first before we move on to the next part. So board members, if you do have a question or two of Dr. Peterson, unmute yourself and go ahead. If not,
this is Dana.
yes, go ahead,
Just
Dana.
a couple of questions on the non-student facing staff. Do we have any data or idea of what percentage of our normal productivity it was going on in the last 4 or 5 months working outside of the office?
So I think President Sullivan, Mr. Starr, I think that we are learning that there are many things that we can do in a remote setting in these functions, which I think is why we're comfortable looking at a postponed date to October 5th, that we can still provide quality of service in many areas while working from home.
Thank you. That's, it's an interesting concept. Some of the other larger entities in the Valley have found that productivity hasn't diminished much at all, and now they're thinking about making that more the norm than working in an office environment, which means I wouldn't want to invest in any commercial property right now. But the other question is, when it comes to the CTE programs and others that require work or hands-on work, have we looked at staggering cohorts to accommodate smaller class sizes and yet meet the needs of all of those students that are involved in those programs?
So yes, yes, part of our planning is to be able to set up environments in which all the CTE programs can be successful. That does include some staggering. That does include spreading, doing parts of the programming in hybrid, and then just doing the hands-on components on campus. Those are all built into the college's plans for the fall schedule. And we are working on contingency planning. So if for some reason we would be required to step away again fully remotely, we'll be prepared to respond to those courses as well.
Thanks, Dr. Peterson. Another question I just thought of, the governor has the driving steering wheel in this case. If he would come in and say he doesn't want classes starting until October or whenever, do we fall under his orders? I'm assuming we do. And would that obviously change everything?
President Sullivan, Mr. Starr, I would have to defer that to Ms. Cooper. I'm not exactly sure what, I don't believe we do, but I'm not definitive on that.
This is Leslie Cooper. That's actually probably an interesting question, both legally and practically, is what I would say.
Okay.
And when is
The
it?
extent of the governor's authority over the community colleges is unclear. On the other hand, a decision like that would obviously have come after a great deal of deliberation, would not be made lightly, and I don't think then, I think then that we would have to consider it carefully, even if we were uncertain of the legal basis for the decision.
Well, Mrs. Cooper, I'm thinking about our charter schools and other schools like our on-campus charter schools that probably do fall under the governor's purview in that regard. That would obviously have an effect on some of our students in that regard. So I'm wondering, as you said, I'm guessing that we have to consider what the governor says, and because it affects part of our operation, maybe not the largest part, but certainly those students that are high school students in dual enrollment or in concurrent enrollment.
And that would be the most significant challenge. I think the charter schools would be relatively easy to handle, but meeting the needs of dual and concurrently enrolled students in an environment where the start dates were not roughly aligned be very difficult and have a significant impact on students.
Thank you. That's it.
Mrs. President Sullivan, if I may also respond to that.
Yes,
To
Dr.
Mr. Thank you, to Mr. Sarr's question. And the other thing to keep in mind, Mr. Sarr, is that our high school, charter high school students tend to take courses at the college level that are the transferable ones in nature, the completion of the AJEC type courses, and are less likely to be in some of those CTE. So my point is that if a mandate did come down that our high school students were not able to come and be in a classroom, that for at least the college component courses, they should already be enrolled in hybrid or online classes, or classes that would be easily moved over if we could not meet face to face.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sarr. Anyone else have any questions before we move on to the crux of our meeting today?
This is Jean McGrath.
Yes, Mrs. McGrath.
I'm concerned about the training and the ability for our athletes to keep fit. And I'm wondering if it's possible, I would suggest that we keep all of our facilities open and available to them. Perhaps they could make reservations when they wanted to use them, but and if they need to bring in some friends or other athletes so that they could have a semi-competitive ability to play a game or part of a game, I think we need to make access of all the facilities and the training facilities for them, because we can't expect them to show up at the second submitter fit and ready to go and expect them to do all their training on their own and find facilities to train in.
Thank you, Mrs. McGrath. Dr. Gonzalez, is that issue going to be addressed in the next portion of this presentation?
President Sullivan, Mrs. McGrath, yes, we can address that question in the next presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mrs. McGrath, do you have any question pertinent to the first part of the presentation?
Yes. I'm still on telephone, and when we have slides, I'd really appreciate it if we could have the slides sent to our email ahead of time. And at the very least, at the end of the presentation.
Interrupt, but it was sent to us yesterday, all of us as board members. And Elsa, if you could you resend that quickly to Mrs. McGrath now, so just in case she can also look on her screen? We can resend it to you, Mrs. McGrath. It came yesterday. I'm trying to remember what time.
Yes, there was also a package delivered to your door this morning.
I was home this morning. I didn't hear a doorbell.
I sent you a text to let you know it had been delivered. I will resend right now.
I'm not able to figure out how to open text on this goofy phone I have.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And it was a good question, and I'm glad that we have sent you that information, because absolutely that's important that we have a hard copy to look at as well as what's on screen. I'm going to move us then. Any other questions from any other board members on the first portion?
See, if I may, this is Dr. Narini.
Yes, Dr. Narini.
Yeah, not so much a question, but just to add to all the great work that's been going on, because I returned to work this week, and especially as we're looking at enrollment, it's something to think through in the future, because because the schools are going to be online and students aren't going to be on campuses as much. We just want to maybe think through some of the different ways to help our outreach staff, our admission staff, and stuff to work with the school, since we are going to be doing applications online, since we are going to be doing registrations online. Just something to help work with them on helping students get enrolled, get admitted, get through the process. I know we've got a whole bunch of stuff going on here now, but that's just one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind, because they are the pipeline that are coming in. And so how are we going to help recruit and enroll students? But that's just something for food of thought, for thought.
Okay. I don't want to be rude to any of you as board members, but I am going to move us into athletics, being that we might end up having to go over our allotted time for this. So with that, back to you, Dr. Gonzalez, and I believe you introduced Dr. Dale.
Yes, at this time, I'd like to have Dr. Dale and Christina prepare to present. Thank you.
Chancellor, this is Paul Dale, President Sullivan, members of the board, colleagues and guests. On behalf of the college presidents, it's my pleasure to introduce the topic this afternoon. And shortly thereafter, I will turn it over to Christina Hundley to present you in some overview of our student athletes. And then I'll come back on to provide some wrap-ups. But before I do that, I'd just like to make a few quick opening comments. Thank you, Dr. Peterson, for creating the context for the greater regional Maricopa County status. Thank you for reminding us that we are moving forward with some objective criteria to evaluate the return to campus. Clearly, it was important, I think, that we review the safety standards that we've established for return to campus. And it's simply to point out is that intercollegiate athletics certainly is a subset of our learning and working spaces, and which involves not only our students, but our employees, our coaches, our trainers, and our athletic personnel. It was good to see the review of the guiding principles. We really are struggling with those same guiding principles, the balance between the desire to bring our athletes back to compete, at the same time balancing that with our commitment to their health, welfare, and safety. And then I would be remiss before we start this brief overview of athletics, just to point out that this has been an extremely challenging situation because we're dealing with such a fluid environment. As you all know, the NJCAA just came out yesterday with a set of recommendations impacting both fall and spring sports. So clearly what we knew yesterday is, or what we know today, is much different than from yesterday. And you'll see in our slides, there are a couple slides that are in fact, haven't been updated simply because things have changed since we prepared the slide. So with those introductory comments, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. As Chancellor Gonzalez shared with us earlier, we've actually held 3 community forums, 2 with our external community and a 3rd one with our coaches. In all cases, the presidents, athletic directors participated in that, and we found that to be very, very valuable in terms of feedback, observations. It was really kind of centered around 5 different areas in terms of questions and comments and concerns. The first being really a lot of questions around the status for our students, you know, eligibility issues, continuation of scholarships, connections with coaches, those types of things. Second theme that came out was really the timing of recommendations moving forward, the implications of the timing, you know, providing a deeper understanding that with athletics, it's very difficult to make instantaneous real-time decisions or just-in-time decisions given the nature of seasons, the nature of preparation. Clearly, a lot of questions around risk mitigation, which you heard a little bit about in terms of the Maricopa safety procedures in Dr. Peterson's presentation. A lot of questions about what other institutions are doing, and we'll provide some additional data on that. Again, most recently, you may have read that the entire California community colleges have, as an example, have moved their sports, their fall sports into the spring semester. And then I think what for me was most compelling, and I think my colleagues would agree, is just the compassion or passion, advocacy, and testimonials by our student athletes and parents who clearly we value their input, and we found that to be very helpful. And those of us who received emails and phone calls, clearly it mirrored some of the very same stories and perspectives. And so again, we're very appreciative of our student athletes engaging. We feel it's just part of their development as a future leader too. So that's just kind of the general themes, if you will, from the community forums. Again, very, very helpful. The coaches' feedback was also very helpful as well. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick overview where we're going to go. I've already covered the community feedback, but in a moment I'll turn it over to Christina Hundley, who is the chair of the District Athletic Council, and she'll walk us through kind of a snapshot of who we are in terms of intercollegiate athletics and our students. And then I'll come back on and talk a little bit more about some of the national NJCAA issues, as well as some of the issues that the presidents and the athletic directors are grappling with as it relates to how the pandemic impacts intercollegiate play. So with that, it'd be my pleasure to turn it over to Christina Hundley.
Thank you, Dr. Dale. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Christina Hundley, and I serve as the athletic director at Paradise Valley Community College and currently serving as the president of the District Athletic Council, which is comprised of the 9 athletic directors at our Maricopa colleges that host athletics. As Dr. Dale said, I'm here today to introduce you to athletics. I know most of you have taken part in our athletics offerings across the board, but we do have 9 colleges in our system that support 15 individual sports, and in those 9 colleges we comprise 85 teams. You can actually advance the slide. I'm sorry, I should have led with that. 85 teams total at our 9 colleges in those 15 individual sports, and annually as athletic directors and athletic personnel we're charged shepherding and supporting an average of 1,500 student athletes in our system. So we are a strong cohort of Maricopa Community College student athletes and personnel that represent 9 colleges in the system. Next slide, please. This slide gives you an idea of what teams we host. These are all NJCAA intercollegiate athletic teams that are hosted at our 9 colleges. We have 8 women's sports that we host, as well as 7 men's sports. And each of our 9 colleges supports anywhere between 2 and all of these sports at our individual colleges. Next slide, please. As we all know, in Maricopa County, our student body is diverse. Our student athlete within Maricopa Community Colleges is as diverse, if not more so, than our general student populace. And as you can see here, the for minority versus minority students, as well as male versus female students, has climbed over the past 5 years. And that's been a steady climb. We're proud of our diversity. We're proud of representing the Maricopa community, and our student athletes are proud to be part of our system. Next slide, please. Academics are the focal point of what we do. As we all know, our student athletes are students first, and we take great pride in supporting our students as much, if not more so, in the academic realm as we do in the athletic realm. As you can see here, our completion rates for student athletes are typically higher than that of the average student populace at any given college within Maricopa Community Colleges. And this data point here shows our success rates. Next slide, please. Due to the nature of athletics and our student athletes being pushed to academically succeed, our student athletes also have that credit momentum that is far higher than the average student at our colleges. Our students typically will be enrolled full-time and typically will earn 12 credits or more per semester. That's partially by nature of them being student athletes and the requirement of being full-time to compete, but more so I would say that this is because of the personnel that's behind them and pushing them to be successful in the classroom and attain their academic goals. Next slide, please. On that note, we also transfer students at a very high rate. As you can see here, we've climbed since 17-18 to be able to transfer students to four-year institutions, whether or not they continue their athletic endeavors at the four-year institutions. These student athletes are transferring, and that base, the ability to do that is because of the base that we give them academically at Maricopa Community Colleges. So again, we're extremely proud of the students that our student athletes are, and we support them as much as they love being part of us. So the competitive nature of athletes is just that. That's part of their nature. And that is as apparent in the classroom as it is on the field. With that, I will hand it back to Dr. Dale. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Before we advance to the next slide, I just certainly want to reiterate and summarize that the Maricopa Community Colleges, the presidents, the athletic directors, faculty, and staff are very supportive of student athletes. Clearly, any decision around athletes we take with great seriousness because of the success of our athletic programs. You know, if we add an additional slide, we can certainly talk about the number of academic All-Americans, national champions, and that's because Maricopa has done athletics and they've done it well. So that certainly gives you a snapshot of who we are in terms of the student athletes we serve. With that, let's transition into some of the issues that we've been grappling with as we, if you move to the next slide, please. Again, going back to balancing those two guiding principles, the guiding principle to allow athletes to compete and continue, but map that against or compare that against our guiding principles around athlete safety. So again, I won't necessarily read all this line by line, but clearly our goal is to, you know, provide an athletic space, competition practice and training that meets the same safety standards that our students are going to receive in small class sizes, hybrid class, those kinds of things. So as you see, there are a number of Maricopa adopted safety procedures that in many cases are very, very difficult to replicate in a competitive environment. So for example, in soccer or basketball or volleyball, it's virtually impossible to maintain physical or social distancing as well as the requirement for face coverings. Additionally, for the safety of our athletes and our coaches and our trainers, as Dr. Peterson pointed out, is that the current Maricopa standard is if we have a COVID-19 positive athlete or coach or trainer, that would necessitate a 14-day quarantine for the safety of the entire team. Additionally, our current proposed safety procedures, at this point, we do not have an adopted testing protocol, would not test pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic COVID-19 infected student athletes and or coaches and or the trainers for that matter. And again, as we pointed out earlier, the medical studies are indicating that up to 50% of infected COVID-19 individuals are either asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, which they can also be contagious during that period of time. Additionally, we're struggling with in terms of our number of athletic trainers are not at an adequate level to support all of our teams in this COVID-19 environment. And then lastly, we can certainly come back to this given Mrs. McGrath's question about our indoor training spaces and facilities to maintain social distancing. So these are some of the safety parameters that we're mapping decisions around placing our athletes and our coaches and trainers in safe environments so that we don't contribute to continued infection rates in Maricopa County. Next slide, please. So again, at the national level, and as I indicated earlier, it really is changing almost on a daily basis in terms of again, addressing intercollegiate athletics. And again, what makes athletics somewhat unique is that we are governed by the NJCAA. And so our competitive play, our postseason play is really hinged upon recommendation and guidelines coming from the NJCAA. I wanted to point out a couple things. Currently, right now, the NJCAA does not provide a COVID-19 testing protocol. With that said, we are still in the process of evaluating options for the Maricopa community colleges should we engage in testing protocols. Recently, as based upon the contract that the NJCAA has with a testing firm, we've been quoted a price of $150 a test if we were to begin to test our athletes prior to engaging in any kind of practice or training. And again, we know that that's a changing environment too, as we're well aware that just yesterday, or in fact, just this morning, ASU announced a different testing protocol. So again, the whole testing protocol is somewhat of a moving target, if you will, in terms of accessibility and cost. But you can see if we were to engage in NJCAA contracted testing, the kinds of numbers that would cost the district. You know, certainly one of the concerns that the NJCAA and the NCAA has shared is just the ability to consistently follow safety protocols across all teams, not just the teams that Maricopa would compete against. As I noted earlier, again, yesterday, the NJCAA did vote on a set of recommendations that in essence is moving most all fall sports to have a spring competition. And we can talk more about that later, but again, clearly that was not in the NJCAA plans several weeks ago. Just a quick update, as of the date of this presentation, 51 NJCAA colleges had already suspended fall sports. And then we learned again just Thursday of last week that the 5 rural colleges, Arizona Western, Central, Cochise, Yavapai, and Eastern, all have suspended fall sports. Again, in regards to safety of their student athletes, coaches, and trainers. Next slide, please. This was just a place marker to, again, remind us about the NJCAA making their recommendations. So next slide, please. So given where we've been, these are the proposed next steps that we have reviewed with the presidents and the athletics directors and Chancellor Gonzalez. We are finally compiling, again, the comments and suggestions from the listening sessions, of which I highlighted 5 themes. The presidents, the vice presidents of student affairs, and the athletic directors have pretty much been in every other day conversation over the last 2 weeks to submit a revised recommendation to the chancellor, and that is nearly complete at this point. Given that, and I know the chancellor has the desire, given that this impacts student athletes, to review all that input and then make a decision as soon as possible. And then one thing I do want to note, and it probably goes without saying, but all of our recommendations include monitoring points. So again, I think we learned, as Dr. Peterson pointed out, that it's somewhat artificial to set a date and to say on such and such a date this will happen, given that we have no control over the environmental factors. And so all of our recommendations will include monitoring points throughout fall and spring semesters to, again, ensure that the safety of our student athletes, coaches, trainers, and athletics department personnel are maintained. So those are our proposed next steps. And I believe our next slide will open it up for question and answer. And Christina Huntley, myself, the chancellor, and other presidents who are on the panelist will attempt to respond to your questions. And again, just I would put a disclaimer there that given that we're in somewhat of a still moving, changing environment, we will answer the questions as best as we can with certainty. But with that, we would be happy to open up to questions and ask for further clarification at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Dale. This is Marie. I wanted to make a couple statements before I open this up for questions. One, the record, please note that Dr. Thor joined us a while ago, both to listen and now is available to participate. And so I want the record to note that, please. The 2 things, when going back to the NJCAA slide, and yesterday they made further recommendations, and you said this slide reflects prior comments. What specifically is modified on this list of issues and concerns? Go back one more slide, please. That has changed. Would you answer that question, please?
President Sullivan, members of the board, I would like to ask Christina Huntley, since she is an active member and leader within the NJCAA, to give you an overview of the actual actually they're no longer recommendations, they are decisions that the NJCAA has made. So Christina, if you had a high level, would just maybe hit the 3 or 4 major points of the overall recommendations, I'm sorry, the overall decisions from the NJCAA, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dale. Governing board, Dr. Dale, I believe, was speaking specifically to bullet point number 4 on this slide at the time of publication. This has changed as of yesterday, Monday. The NJCAA Board of Regents voted to move the majority of fall 2020 sports to spring 2021, with the exception of one sport being cross country. What that means for the country and for the NJCAA is that traditionally fall sports that the NJCAA hosts championship seasons in, those will now be moved to spring 2021 as opposed to in fall 2020, therefore furthering the offerings and opportunities for fall sports student athletes to possibly have a chance in spring to in their championship season.
And what is this? Can you tell us what the status of Pima Community College is?
Pima Community College, yes, Pima Community College, I spoke with their AD last night. They have not made a firm recommendation, but they are following, as of last night, they are following suit with the NJCAA to move the championship seasons from fall to spring.
And who are the schools, which are the schools that our teams in particular compete against most often?
Most often, it's what's known as the Arizona Community College Athletic Conference, the ACAC, if you will. It is comprised of all Maricopa community colleges, as well as the outlying colleges of Pima, Central, Eastern, Western, and Cochise College. Oh, and also Yavapai, excuse me.
So a lot of the schools that have already suspended would be out of or not even available for us to compete with during the fall. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, at this point, the NJCAA structure has made it so that there will not be competition available in almost all sports in fall 2020. They have moved them all to competition based in spring 2021.
Thank you. And then would someone please answer Mrs. McGrath's question about facilities before we open it up for other questions?
President Sullivan, I'll take a high-level response, then I'll also ask Christina Hunley to respond to that as well. You know, clearly our intent with any interaction on our campuses is to maintain the physical and social distancing required by the CDC and recommended by Governor Ducey at this point, which would include physical distancing, which would include wearing of a face cover where appropriate, and then it would require significant cleaning and sanitation in between uses. And currently, as you're all aware, is that gyms in the state of Arizona are closed right now through the end of July. So that's kind of a high-level response in terms of where we would apply the same guiding safety principles. With that, I'd like Christina Huntley to respond to perhaps some of the strategy we might use to mitigate that risk. And again, I might add too that across the 9 colleges, our facilities vary in size in terms of access, given the physical structures of our campuses. But with that, Christina, if you would mind sharing just some thoughts about how we might, given those protocols, that we might address Mrs. McGrath's concerns.
Yes, Dr. Dale, Mrs. McGrath, board, the trouble that we have is falling in line with the Maricopa Community College's mandates and decisions to keep campuses closed to public and to the majority of classes. We fall under that guise, so that is problematic for us. While we certainly would like to offer our students a space if it's not safe to bring students back to campus, that's problematic for us again, but do know this, that as far as working out on their own and keeping in shape to be prepared for a spring 2021 season, all of our coaches and athletic personnel are in day-to-day contact with our student athletes to keep them going in their personal spaces, much like we've seen done with the pro leagues before they've reported for camps. So again, we have a balancing act between being able to provide safe space for student athletes to participate. However, the larger conversation with the district, having their campuses closed to the public, does prove problematic.
Thank you, Ms. Hunley. With that, then board members, I know I often go in alphabetical order or the way I see you listed here. So with that, start with you, Mr. Saar. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, first let me say that I listened to both of the listening sessions last week, and I'm very proud of all the people, students and faculty and parents who participated. It was an outstanding discussion, heartfelt in all cases, and so I really appreciate our ability to have those kind of listening sessions with that kind of output that we got from them. I guess comment standpoint, I like what the NJCCAA has decided on, moving our fall sports to the spring. There are a few athletes that play in multiple sports, but I don't think they're by any means a majority. And so I really think, other than if we have facility conflicts that need to be worked out, to me, that's the best solution at this point. We don't know what's going to happen in January any more than we know what's going to happen tomorrow. So postponing them until the spring semester, I think, gives us an opportunity to get back to some normal if it's possible at that time, without totally eliminating those students in spring sports from having the opportunity to participate and to show their skills if they're planning on going into a Division 1 or 2 or 3 program based on performance here. So I like that decision that the NJCAA came up with, and I hope that we get that closely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saar. Moving down the list that I see, Mr. Hendricks.
I'm good. I'm fine with the presentation.
Any point of view or questions?
I'm just listening. I'm fine with what's being said.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Munoz, you're noted on my list. We'd be interested in your point of view as the student representative.
Hi, thank you. So I definitely agree with the presentation, everything that was said. And I definitely like how it gives kind of an alternative to be able to keep the fall sports in. However, I did have a question per se. So I'm not sure the amount of students that would be involved in this, but I'm not sure if there's students who do sports in both the fall and spring, and how that would impact them. I'm not sure also if this would be a question specifically for them, but if students are on a sports scholarship, are they still going to be able to receive their funds?
Dr. Dale, can you take a chance at those?
Yeah, Ms. Munoz, President Sullivan, members of the board, I'll take a response to that, and if it's not clear enough, I'm sure Christine Huntley will correct me on it. But yes, student scholarships, students who have signed a letter of intent and enroll in one of our colleges, we are going to honor those scholarships, which we've said all along. Clearly, that's an important commitment that we're making to our student athletes. Second of all, in terms of those athletes that compete in multiple sports, really that's primarily only an issue in cross country and track. Obviously, cross country runners compete actually in 3 sports, believe it or not. They compete in cross country, indoor track, and outdoor track. But the beauty of that is it gives them an opportunity to compete in the spring as well. And clearly distance events are a part of marathon, part of cross country, but also part of indoor and outdoor track. So I would guess that there are very few multi-sport athletes who perhaps are a soccer and a baseball player. But I would defer to Christina Huntley if she had more detailed information, but primarily it would involve our cross country and track athletes, but that's a normal thing that would occur anyway. Christina, would you have anything to add to that?
No, Dr. Dale, that's accurate. It's very few students who do compete, but there would be ways to try to work out students to be able to compete in both. And there may just be some instances where a student has to make a choice, but we would be able to cross that bridge come spring, given the opportunity for seasons in spring 21.
Thank you. Ms. Munoz, do you have any further questions?
That was it for me. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Mrs. McGrath.
Yes, I have questions in at least 3 different areas. The first one is golf. How do we have our golf team practice? Do we pay for the fees at the various courses? Do we have a contract with a course that we send them to? How do we keep them playing golf year-round?
Ms. Hundley?
Ms. McGrath, the golfers obviously practice off-site at private and public courses around the valley. Many of our coaches within Maricopa Community Colleges, our golf coaches, work at local golf courses. What each individual school has worked out with those host golf courses, I would have to defer to each and every athletic director, but I can tell you that those golfers do practice at local Arizona golf courses, and whether or not those are paid is a school by school and team by team decision.
Well, I'm not talking so much about the decisions. I'm talking about who pays for them to practice golf. Do we have a contract with various courses, or do we pay as they go to play? How do we do that? Because I'm quite certain we don't ask them to pay the fees.
Again, for the exact answer for each of our golf teams, I would have to defer to each college, but I can tell you that some schools do pay for practice time. Some schools do have it worked out with courses to donate practice time for which there is no charge, but any expenses that are incurred for a student athlete to compete in golf are covered by the individual college budgets for athletics.
I'm hoping that we have made arrangements for these golfers to play up until through regular practice time, because you don't just take up golf at the last minute and say, oh, I'm going to get in shape now. So I'm hoping if that's the case, that we've made arrangements for them to play on these courses. My second one was, Dr. Dale mentioned that I'm concerned about the indoor facilities. I'm also concerned about the outdoor facilities. I'm hoping that we will keep our fields available for, say, the soccer team to practice and or the baseball team to practice, and that we will keep those facilities up and operating. The third one is the gyms. Public gyms have been closed down. I don't know that private gyms have been closed down, and I don't know that this would be considered part of the protocol that the governor has put in place for closing down gyms. I would hope that we could certainly make arrangements for reservations at the gyms at various times or whatever, but I think we have to keep our gymnasiums and our training facilities open for our athletes starting as soon as school starts, a normal training. I don't think we can wait until the second semester and say, okay, now you can use the gym. I'm very concerned about what I heard today about when the gyms are closed, because as far as I'm concerned, they are not closed. They are private training facilities for our athletes. Thank you.
Mrs. McGrath, is there a question behind any of the statements that you've made that you want answered?
Yes, I'd like to know what they're planning on doing to keep our athletes in shape and keep them practicing and with golf, with the field sports, and with the gymnasium training for staying in shape.
I did hear Ms. Hundley respond to that a little earlier. Could you reiterate your comment on that and maybe elaborate just a tinge more, Ms. Hundley?
Yes, thank you, Ms. McGrath. As I stated earlier, our coaches and athletic personnel have been working hand in hand, day to day, with our student athletes since mid-March to keep them on programs that will keep them in shape and keep them game ready. Much like we have seen in the pros and at the NCAA level, students are taking responsibility for keeping in shape while they're away from campus and away from their teams. So that is an ongoing process, again, that's been taking place since March and will continue to take place as long as necessary. Again, we defer to the district for facilities due to the district's mandate right now of having campuses closed to the public. So we are in a catch-22 to be able to offer that space to student athletes along with the recommendation. And again, I would have to defer to the presidents and to the chancellor here of what the prognosis is for the 2021 academic and athletic year. Using the NJCAA roadmap, but also taking into consideration the local mandates for Maricopa Community Colleges specifically.
I heard the operative word public. Our facilities are not public, and I think that we should keep them open and operating and available and not consider them public facilities, but facilities specifically for these classes of students that need them. I'm assuming that we don't just shut down the fields and completely neglect them. So I'm looking forward to all of these athletes being able to stay in shape and practice their sport. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McGrath. Dr. Narini, your turn.
Well, thank you. I want to thank the committee for the great job on the presentation. It sounds like NJCAA has kind of laid out a plan for us. So I think that's good. I think it's the best, making the best of a bad situation. And no real questions. I just wanted to say that when we bring back those fall sports in the spring, I just wish that football was one of those sports we brought back in the spring. But other than that, thank you for the presentation.
No comment. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Thank you, Dr. Narini. Dr. Thor.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. I want to echo Mr. Saar's comments. I listened to both of the listening sessions and also have read all of the correspondence that was sent to board members. And I was extremely impressed at how professional everyone has been under what are very difficult and for many very emotional circumstances. Like others, I'm extremely relieved that JCAA has put forward a plan that doesn't leave us just dangling out there ourselves, but allows all the colleges to move forward. But with that said, I have a question about the 5 rural colleges that have suspended fall sports. The verb suspended to me means that they will not happen. Is it our expectation with the plan by NJCAA that those colleges will now decide that they will do their fall sports in spring?
Whomever wants to answer that, please.
Go ahead.
President Sullivan, Dr. Thor, I've had a conversation or two with some of the presidents that are listed here. And actually their plan was to move the fall sports to the spring and try to work with one another to have some sort of a spring session for those fall sports. So I would imagine now that with this NJCAA decision that has come out, that that's very welcome news for them, because it does create an opportunity now for them to jump in to a national competition as they would have likely missed had the NJCAA not made this decision before the start of fall sports.
Very good, because if they stayed suspended, I assume that would make it difficult for us in terms of being able to compete with people in our own region.
That's correct.
So that's good news.
Any other questions, Dr. Thor?
I have no other questions, except to also express appreciation for a very comprehensive session today, as well as the listening sessions that took place recently.
Thank you. Before I turn it back to you, Dr. Gonzalez, I also want to comment that I listened to the 2 listening sessions, and I appreciated the regard that we offered to the public to offer their points of view and comments. and how everyone worked hard to answer the questions that were raised. It is apparent that we have quite a community of support for our student athletes. And I'm hoping that as a decision is formulated, there are opportunities to engage the families, the parents, the athletes themselves in ongoing discussions and solutions to these issues. Uh, Certainly keeping the health and safety of our students top of mind is very important. And I recognize that just the functionality of our space and our staffing and others creates both wonderful opportunities, but also creates some restrictions to what we're able to do that perhaps some of our the Division I schools and others have a leg up on us for those. So with that, I know that there'll be some decision making and there's some next step. And as you come to a conclusion, you will be informing us, the board. But I'll give this back to you for closing comments after I show my appreciation and express my thanks to the folks that put together both presentations, one of the return to work and secondly on the athletics. I know it's taken a lot of time and energy, but I believe it's been well spent in both categories. So thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, for your leadership on this and to those that have participated with you.
Thank you, President Sullivan, and members of the board. I defer all of that praise and credit to the folks that presented here and those who were waiting in the wings to respond. These presentations have touched many hands, but it's more than a presentation. For many, it's a life passion for the work that they do that, is affected by the types of decisions that we make. So I really want to thank our athletic directors and our coaches. It is very clear, it became very clear to me, and I'm not surprised. I'm a former athlete and former coach myself, that our coaches have extremely positive impacts on the students, and I'm just very appreciative of them. The sports is really an extension of a classroom where they may not be learning pure mathematics or pure reading and writing, but they're certainly learning about defeat and triumph, and a positive attitude to never quit. So I just want to extend my appreciation for the many, many hours that they spend coaching. And then, I'll go ahead and make this an announcement now. I plan to do it when I release the decision that we finally land on here, but I'll do it in this public space because of your comments about afforded opportunities for people to continue to share their experiences and thoughts on athletics in our district. One of the things that we're going to be unveiling very soon, and hopefully by the end of this week, is a website that is dedicated entirely to athletics and COVID-19 that would provide up-to-the-minute updates for athletes, coaches, and the community to view on what's happening related to athletics in our district. And then the second thing that I'm doing, and this has really stemmed from an idea from head baseball coach over at Glendale Community College, Ed Trujillo, who shared an idea of having a council that is representative of the community, of coaches, of athletes, of major supporters, and I thought it was a great idea. So we're actually in the process of developing what will likely be called the Maricopa Athletic Advisory Council. We'll determine what that membership looks like. We'll determine the number of times that we meet. Maybe it's a one semester or a twice semester type of meeting, but this will be the venue and an opportunity for the public, for coaches, for athletes to share information, to weigh in. And one of the things that I was very impressed with at the presentations was the amount of support that parents and supporters were willing to provide to the district. They were saying, we are here to help. And I take that as that we probably haven't created that opportunity as best we could to invite in that sort of help. And I'm hoping that this advisory council that we're going to form will serve as a venue for that too, to determine what help looks like. on the other end of our athletics. So again, thank you. Appreciate this opportunity, and we appreciate your continued support and leadership as a governing board. Those are my closing comments.
I am going to ask you, Dr. Gonzalez, what is your timing to
For a decision?
digest this and then get back to the board, certainly with your thoughts and decision?
I would hope that by the end of this week that we will have a decision. And I know that there are many people that are waiting to hear, and you know, the NJC, I'm sorry, I have such a hard time saying it, NJCAA decision is very helpful in our deliberation of that decision.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other closing comments by any board member before I adjourn our meeting 5 minutes early? Oh my goodness. I don't see anyone unmuting, so I'm going to presume that people have said what they needed to and wanted to. And with that, thank you again for the time that you took for this work session. We appreciate it, and certainly keeps us informed. And I think the important thing is the transparency and also understanding the interests of all of the constituents invested in any decision in this arena. So thank you with that. And I say good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Stay cool.